Naila Amaru is a strategist for the Democratic Party based in New York, and she joined me earlier. Naila Amaru, thank you so much for being with us. Could this be the end of Joe Biden's tilt at a second term?
I think it's a bit premature to think that it could potentially be the end. However, today's events is certainly not helping his case in terms of how he wants to position himself to be perceived by the American public as a competent political leader who is fully prepared for a second term. I think what I will be watching for, along with many other Americans, is if this report has any longevity in the news cycle here in America. If it has legs, then it could probably do some significant damage as Joe Biden, again, is trying to position himself with this type of information plaguing his campaign.
The special counsel report was not good for Joe Biden, but the attempted cleanup job was arguably much worse. How much more damaging was that, do you think?
It depends on how people will perceive it, and also how the Biden camp will want to spin it, considering the argument that he's trying to push back, and considering moments like that just reinforce that message that, hey, this guy is up there and cognitively he may not be prepared to lead the quote unquote free world. Again, is not necessarily doing him any favors in the case that he's trying to convince to the American people.
And I guess the other factor here is that this is not a new accusation or element of Joe Biden's presidency that his opponents have been focusing on. Even before 2020, there were questions raised by his opponents about his mental acuity. Does this potentially kind of codify those concerns in a formal way?
I think it's important to make a distinction between his age and mental acuity, and I think this type of situation kind of clarifies the difference between the two. Most of us, may experience people who are his age and much older, who are sharp as tacks, right? However, 4 years in, now that he has a microphone in front of his face because he's the president, there's ample opportunity for these types of moments and these types of situations to not just be caught on the public record, but to be shown repeatedly over and over and over again. And again, it's these types of situations and these types of mistakes that can be hurtful to, again, this narrative that he's been trying to push back for the past 4 years. It makes his argument that much more difficult to prove that he is capable when these types of mistakes happen.
As you stress, it's too early to say that this is the end for Joe Biden, and that is absolutely true. But should things get worse for him politically, substantially worse, and there needed to be, in the Democratic strategists' minds, a change, how would that happen, considering that we're well into the primaries already?
Absolutely. I think that process would take place in two different ways. There's clearly the legal procedural way. However, legal process aside, I think the more important conversation is the political process of what is the message that the Democratic National Party is sending to Americans on both sides of the aisle when something as drastic as a measure as that would have to happen. How then does any candidate, regardless of how qualified or popular they may be, make the case to the American people and win an election with a false start that was possibly preventable to begin with? It's a hard case to win.
Yeah, I mean, you say it could have been preventable, and this is all hypothetical, I stress, but what is your assessment of how this has been handled? Should there have been a handover at some point?
I think the way that it's been handled has been a disappointment, in the sense that it could have been handled better. Listen, I don't think that it's necessarily an inspiring story for America to look at the two candidates that we will most likely be voting for again, which will most likely be the candidates that we voted for or against 4 years ago, right? There hasn't been an investment in the Democratic bench. There hasn't really been at least a public conversation in terms of succession leadership building of, if Biden should choose not to run or choose to step down, who is that next person? There has not been a public conversation in terms of how the Democratic Party wants to invest in next generation leadership and make sure that no matter where we are in terms of the presidency or governorship, what have you, that we have someone who is ready, willing, and able to step up and serve, and not have those moments be dependent on situations like this, possibly.
Well, who would be the front runners? I read that Michelle Obama has been attracting significant donations, even though she's not in the running officially. Same for Gavin Newsom of California. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan has been talked about too.
Absolutely. I don't want to put any money on any of the racehorses, but listen, American voters, we like our candidates for our own reasons. Michelle Obama and Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer are all incredible people in their own rights. But the type of, voter that is drawn to Obama is maybe a different voter that's drawn to Newsom. And that's what the electoral process is about, right? Branding yourself as a candidate, establishing who your base of voters is, and making sure that your campaign message and your policy agenda builds that base as big as possible so that you can win the votes that you need to win the primary.
Nayela Amaru, great to have your insights. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's Democratic Party strategist Nayela Amaru.